The Portrait of Mr. Hale. The winter light slanted through the tall windows of Evermere Hall, pale and cold as porcelain. Dust drifted like quiet snowflakes through the still air, and the scent of turpentine lingered, faint but sharp, in the corners of the gallery. Miss Eleanor Vance, the new art restorer, stood before the covered painting that had drawn her here, a portrait whispered about among collectors and servants alike. Some called it cursed, others merely unsettling. But to Eleanor, whose fascination with lost art bordered on obsession, it was simply unfinished work. The cloth covering it had yellowed with time, the fabric brittle beneath her fingers. She hesitated only a moment before drawing it back, and there he was, Mr. Hale. Or rather, the likeness of a man so vividly rendered it felt as though he might exhale at any moment. His gaze, dark, intelligent, unsettlingly alive, seemed to pierce through the glassy barrier of paint. His lips were curved in the faintest suggestion of a smile, the kind that promised both charm and danger. Eleanor's heart gave a curious flutter. "So," she murmured, "this is what they were afraid of. The hall and its shadows." Evermere Hall stood on the edge of the moors, its stone facade weathered by centuries of wind and whispers. Once home to the Hale family, it had fallen into disuse after the last heir vanished without trace, nearly 100 years before. The villagers told stories, of strange lights in the gallery, of music playing with no musician, of visitors who claimed to see a man in the windows, long after the house had been abandoned. Eleanor didn't believe in such things, or at least, she told herself she didn't. Each night, after the staff retired, she worked in solitude, removing layers of soot and varnish, coaxing the painting's colors back to life. With every careful stroke, she revealed more of the man beneath the grime. His eyes regained their depth, his skin its pallid warmth. Yet, as she worked, a strange unease began to grow. She would glance up and find the expression slightly changed, the smile a little softer, the gaze more direct. Once she could have sworn his pupils dilated when her brush touched his painted cheek. "Fatigue," she whispered to herself. "That's all." The letters. One stormy evening, while searching through the drawers of an old escritoire, Eleanor discovered a bundle of letters tied with black ribbon. They were addressed to Miss L. Penrose, my beloved L., and signed yours eternally, R. H. Her breath caught. The letters were from Richard Hale, the very man in the portrait. Most of the pages were tender, filled with longing and poetic devotion. But as she read on, they grew darker. The final letter was little more than a plea. "They tell me I must stop sitting for the portrait, that each session drains me. But I cannot. The more she paints me, the more alive I feel. I would give her everything, even what God himself has given me, if it means I might remain by her side." Eleanor sat back, pulse racing. The painter, Miss L. Penrose, had vanished around the same time as Hale. The portrait, completed shortly after, had been locked away ever since. She looked up at the painting again. The eyes gleamed faintly, as though reflecting candlelight, though no candle was lit. The awakening. That night, sleep eluded her. The wind moaned through the corridors, and somewhere deep within the house, a clock began to tick, though it hadn't worked in years. Drawn by an inexplicable pull, Eleanor rose and made her way to the gallery. The moon hung low over the moors, its light spilling across the floor like a river of silver. The portrait stood uncovered, the face of Mr. Hale half illumined, half swallowed by shadow. She felt the air change, warmer, heavier, charged with something she could not name. "Mr. Hale," she said softly, almost playfully, "your secret's safe with me." The words seemed to linger. And then, faintly, impossibly, came a whisper. "Is it?" Eleanor froze. The sound was not quite in the room, not quite outside of it either. It seemed to vibrate from the canvas itself. Her breath came fast. She stepped closer, heart hammering in her throat. "Who's there?" The painted lips parted, only slightly. Enough. The next thing she remembered was darkness, the sudden rush of cold, the shattering echo of her lantern hitting the floor, the packed in paint. She awoke on the gallery floor, the first light of dawn spilling across her face. Her skin felt feverish, her limbs heavy. The portrait, unchanged, loomed above her. And yet something was wrong. The brush she had left on the easel was wet with crimson, though no paint had been opened. Her reflection in the gilt frame looked pale, translucent, almost. And for an instant, she thought she saw his eyes staring through hers. Over the following days, she could not keep away from the painting. It called to her, a constant murmur at the edge of her thoughts. She began restoring more fervently than ever, her hands trembling with strange energy. Soon, the colors seemed to glow from within. The man's expression had changed again, no longer melancholy but content, almost grateful. Her own complexion, however, had faded to a fragile pallor. The truth of Mr. Hale. In her final journal entry, found weeks later, Eleanor's handwriting was erratic, desperate. "I understand now. He was never trapped. Not entirely. Each stroke of my brush, each drop of my blood, freed him a little more. He is not the portrait. He is what the portrait consumes. When it is finished, he will be whole again. And I will take her place." The caretakers found her collapsed before the painting, her skin cold as the marble floor. The portrait, however, was transformed. Mr. Hale now stood in full brilliance, color, vitality, and warmth restored. And in the background, barely visible, was the faint, ghostly figure of a woman holding a brush. Her face was Eleanor's. Epilogue. The Visitor. Years later, Evermere Hall opened to the public as a museum. The gallery became its centerpiece, and the portrait of Mr. Hale its crown jewel. Visitors often remarked how alive the subject seemed, how his gaze seemed to follow them as they passed. Some claimed that, if one lingered after dusk, they could see two figures in the painting, the gentleman and the artist, locked forever in their silent communion. And sometimes, when the moonlight strikes the canvas just so, the woman appears to blink,